Peace and love, family. How is everyone doing tonight? Thank you all for joining us on another edition of the RAM Book Club, Resurgence of the African Mind, where we seek to liberate African minds by reading one unit of work at a time. Of course, family, you all know that we are currently reading The African Personality in America. I don't know why I have to look at the book every time. It's like, as soon as I pick it up, I forget the title. But Dr. Kobi Kambon, family, we are on chapter 6. Last week we did chapter 5, the African personality development, and this week we're getting into African personality and African mental health. So it's definitely going to be a good chapter, family. My name is Lady Lapoete Speaks. I am the author of Perceptions of a Misplaced African, Volume 1, available now at ladylapoetespeaks.com at our marketplace, or you can also get yours on ebook, if you prefer electronic copy, through Amazon. Reflections of a Misplaced African Family will be available no later than January 2019. Some other books we got on the run in here. If you and your babies need to learn a little bit more about Africa, you should pick up Aaron Knows About Africa by Naomi Bradley and Benjamin Njai, aka Black Panther. You can get this book also at Lily Lapoete Speaks at the Marketplace, family. We also have Ikaro Mommy, Ikaro Daddy, which teaches young children about respect for their elders and about their ancestors, about prostration and how to dobale, which is how you greet your ancestors or your elders' family. You can also check out this book. I'm going to post it today. It's going to be on the marketplace as well, family. We're going to let Dr. Ma'at introduce herself, and thank you all for joining us.
And before I even introduce myself, while you guys are on Lily Lapoete Speaks, please check out her blogs. This sister writes, I want to just call them fire blogs, sis. I mean, your blogs are fire. You just recently published a blog on the police killing of an unarmed teen in Ohio. You covered that story. So I just want to encourage, folks, when you go to Lily Lapoete Speaks, don't just go there to get the links to Sunday's discussion or to visit the marketplace. Register with the website and check out her blogs. She writes beautiful blogs. She keeps you very informed. She writes blogs that'll make you, that'll leave room for thought, or food for thought, blogs that give you food for thought. She's a wonderful writer. She's African-centered. She does her due diligence before she puts information out there. So it's a blog that you can trust. So, while you're on the website, please check out her blogs. So peace and power, family. My name is Dr. Deanna Bailey, also known as Dr. Oyama. I am co-founder of Ed Anime Productions and the executive producer of Meltrek. Wow, I wish I had more hands, Sister Alima, but Meltrek. All right, Meltrek is a comprehensive program that teaches children the history of African people using a variety of sources. We utilize films, books, and also unit plans to teach our history from our perspective. You can purchase these products from edanimeproductions.com or simply just go to Google, type in Meltrek, and links to purchase our products should populate. I'm also a lecturer, full-time lecturer now at the School of Engineering at Morgan State University. My field is electrical engineering. I teach digital communications, signal processing in electric circuits and electric circuits lab. So I'm there full-time starting in the fall. And I think that's it, sis. I think that's it. I think we could go ahead and jump right on in. Oh, and I'm sorry. Sister Alima and I, we held up materials for your babies. Please don't take that lightly, family. In reading Dr. Kobi Kambon's book, The African Personality in America, he talks about, an African-centered socialization process in a European-centered socialization process. And he was saying that in order for our children to have a strong African self-consciousness, we have to cultivate them in an African-centered environment. And that means participating and having them to participate in African life cycle rituals, celebrations, cultural rituals, having the presence of African cultural icons depicted in our homes, whatever they watch, whatever they read, ensuring that it is African-centered, okay? And that is how our children will develop at least a moderate to strong African-centered, African self-consciousness. Now, he also tells us in this same book that if we send them through a Eurocentric socialization process, meaning that they are cultivated in a European-centered environment, meaning that they, i.e., they participate in European life cycle rituals or the cultural rituals. You see the presence of, European cultural icons. He said that this leads to cultural misorientation. And we're going to talk about cultural misorientation tonight. And cultural misorientation, he says, or he argues in this book, that it is the precursor to a lot of psychopathologies in Africans. Okay. And when we say Africans, we're talking about Africans on the continent and Africans throughout the diaspora. And I found it quite, I'm not going to say funny, but Sister Alima, did you notice in the book, Dr. Kobi Kambon expressed his, I'm trying to think of how to word it, but he basically said he felt, his discomfort with using the word African American. Remember, we talked about that a lot. And I was saying, we don't want to use African American or even Black. We just want to say African, but we do use the word African American because we understand other brothers and sisters. A lot of us identify with that particular term. And so we use it. But a lot of us who are, I don't want to say conscious or woke cis, but a lot of us who know, there's sort of like a discomfort in using certain terms. So, I found it quite funny that you and I were just discussing this on the show maybe a week or two ago. And Baba Kobi Kambon talked about it a little bit in this chat. But go ahead, sis, kick it off. Go on and kick it off, sis. I'm ready to rock and roll.
All right. Let's get into it. The African mentality and mental health. Baba kicked it off by talking about that there seems to be a lot of mental disorders that have generated within the Black community, especially here in America. And he talks about, the drug addiction, abuse, the suicidal behavior, the deviant sexual behavior, criminal behavior. And Baba says that this is all stems from the fact that, of course, we are out of our African minds. Even though he didn't say that, specifically. But in essence, that is the problem. And Baba goes on to say, he also talks about how he talks about our educated people and how they are no better just because they're educated. He says they are intellectually incarcerated by Eurocentric cultural definitions, values, attitudes, and visions. And our leadership as well is merely imitative of the European survival threats. And we know that. I mean, for crying out loud, we had what everyone considered to be a Black president, but what good did that do us? So we all know that our leadership, as well as our celebrities and everything else, they all view life through a European paradigm. Baba goes on to define menticide, and he says that menticide is the virtual depletion of the cultural mentality of a people. And we're definitely struggling with that for sure.
Absolutely.
Baba goes on at the bottom, he starts talking about the Afrocentric paradigm. He says the Afrocentric paradigm for African personality has enabled us to begin to realize the importance of broadening the context of African mental health to encompass those socio-political behavior patterns that have direct implications for the survival and affirmation of the African community. The model of the African personality being articulated herein allows us to explain not only the psychological forces that define African mental health in America, but also the socio-cultural forces that account for such a dangerous, aberrant condition, as is the current state of African psychological affairs throughout the world.
So yes, sis, I see he says that, okay, so he goes on the next section. He's talking about the African self-consciousness in African mental health. So he's just continuing the conversation. He's saying that there are circumstances which can and do interfere with or mitigate the normal functioning of the African personality. And he says that these circumstances where they do occur are usually social, cultural in nature. All right. That's very important, family, that these circumstances, he's saying, that mitigates the normal function of the African personality. He said they are usually social, cultural. I remember sis having a dialogue online, and I was thinking about putting up a post or a poll and asking the question, like, is our biggest problem racism? Is it police brutality? Is it Black on Black crime? Or is it culture? And we can easily argue, sis, that it's culture. That is our biggest problem. Eurocentric cultural oppression. or he says, you know, he broadens it a little bit. Sometimes he'll say Eurasian cultural oppression. That is our biggest problem. And because, you know, when your culture is repressed, not even if your culture is repressed, because I would say that Black people, yes, we have a culture, but we've never in America, sis, created a culture, created one to protect us. Meaning, okay, normally the culture that we currently practice is really like a reactive culture. So it's a system of behaviors that were developed out of things that in response to things that happened to us. But we never actually sat down and designed a culture that was conducive to our growth and development and survival here in North America. And so like our biggest problem right now is the fact, I don't want to say that we don't have no culture, because I've heard people say Black people don't have a culture. We do, but we just don't have a culture, sis, that that protects us, a culture that develops us and our children into the people that we need to be in order to survive here in North America. So
when people say we don't have a culture, it's actually true, you know, because we have an obscure version of European culture. So is that really our culture, or is it a version of someone else's? It's someone else's. You know what I'm saying? So Black people, which are African people, I wish they would. I think if people would start getting into their mind that they're African and stop calling themselves Black, then they won't feel so disconnected. Because often we feel like we'll say Black people don't have a culture. And I say Black people don't, but Africans do. And I say that all the time. People look at me like, well, we ain't African. I'm like, but you have no problem saying you're African American. Like, I never understood that. You'll probably call yourself African American, but if I just leave off the American, you'll think that I mean you're from Liberia or something. Like, it's ridiculous. It really is. But no, Black people don't have a culture. It's a white version. It's a Black version of white people's culture. So no, I don't care who gets offended. We do not have a culture here whatsoever because we haven't created one. Like Dr. Mott said, it's all reactionary because we are reactionary people.
Yeah, sis. And I remember Sister Naya and I was going back and forth. We were going back and forth about this on Facebook. I wish her little butt was on this panel because she would argue us down. No, we do. And I was like, sis, I said when I say the culture that we do have is not the system of behaviors that we do have. It's not ones that we created. It's just.
So how is that our culture?
Absolutely. So we were going back and forth under a post Brother Ujaru put up a while ago about culture. But anyway, he says that under such conditions, so he goes on to talk about the condition of disorder within the African personality. And he says that whenever disorder occurs, it always occurs at the level of the African self-consciousness, right? Never at the deeply rooted, unconscious, and genetically determined level of the African self-extension orientation. That's what he calls it. I call it the African soul or the African spirit that we inherited genetically. So he's saying that whenever there's disorder in the personality, it's never with our spirit. It's always at the conscious level, which he calls the African self-conscious. And then he goes on to say, under such conditions of disorder, the natural African survival thrust of the ASC, the African self-conscious, it becomes distorted into an alien survival thrust, right? And he says an alien self-consciousness, which is destructive to the African personality. I mean, and it's a fact, sis. I mean, when you're operating outside of your natural consciousness, outside of your natural self, of course it's going to be self-destructive, especially if you're emulating a culture that is anti-you, right? So it would be self-destructive.
Right.
All right. So then he goes on, sis, did you have anything on 135 before I show the chart? Did you have anything on 134? I'm sorry, before I show the chart on 135.
No, family. Dr. Mott is just going to show us the chart, and Barbara broke it down a little bit. He says that the broken lines that she's about to show, that they indicate the unnatural weakening in the unity of functioning between ASC and ASEO. So he's saying thus that a breakdown in Afrocentric integrity of the African personality system. This is what this is showing here, family. So it's showing that the African personality system has become dominated at the conscious level of functioning by such basic dispositions of the European survival thrust, like individualism, materialism, aggression, violence, etc. And the model argues that in American society, European worldview systems has achieved dominance over African people's natural worldview orientation through the arrangement of socialization and social indoctrination processes, which he will discuss later on in the chapter.
Absolutely. So where did that go, sis? That was powerful, what you just said. Was that from 136?
134.
Or 134. All right, so family, you see the graph. This is the African personality. You have the core components. Remember, he showed this a long time ago in another chapter. I believe it was in chapter 3. And he showed us a natural functioning African personality. He said we had 2 core components, the African self-consciousness and the African self-extension orientation. And when our personality is natural functioning, right, both of these are in sync with one another. The person or the individual or the African will exhibit basic traits, which he calls Africanisms, right? Unconscious and conscious manifestations of Africanisms. And we're just talking about, African behavior that's common in the African community, right? And he said they'll lead to an African propensity and African survival. And he gives us the basic characters of self-knowledge, oneness, harmony with nature, communalism, group survival, self-reinforcing, enhancing, Afrocentric values, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors, and etc. Okay, but when we have a unnatural functioning African personality, as Sister Alima just stated, these core components, the ASC and the ASEO are out of sync with one another. So you see your ASEO, which is your African spirit, is still trying to manifest basic traits or Africanisms, unconsciously, and it still has an African survival propensity. However, consciously at the conscious level, you're exhibiting distortion in basic traits, alien traits, and then you have an anti-African survival tendency, which leads to a contradiction, a distortion in the African survival. So I just wanted to show the family that. Let me stop sharing. All right, so he moves on, sis, to talk about cultural misorientation, I believe.
Yeah, he does, Queen. He says cultural misorientation is a condition of basic incorrect cultural psychological orientation in African people, in which a pseudo-European Eurocentric self-consciousness comes to dominate the natural ASC of the African personality. It is a condition of contradiction between the natural unconscious and conscious functioning and behavior of the African personality. The obvious form of contradiction represents African person functioning Eurocentrically or according to the European survival thrust. So Baba is basically saying that if you're not behaving or going under African guides, then you're living a contradiction because you are going under European guides using a European survival thrust, which the majority of us are doing.
Absolutely, folks. And we call folks like that, sis, Negropeans, Black Anglo-Saxons. Some people call them coons. Some people call them Uncle Toms and all of that. But, essentially, what do you say, sis?
I like that one. Came from Bobby Wilson, the Black Bourgeoisie. I got to read that book.
The Black Bourgeoisie.
These bougie ass people I live around, that's what they are, the Black Bourgeoisie.
The Black Bourgeoisie. Sis. So those are what we call folks like that. So essentially, we're talking about African people who operate with the European or Eurocentric conscious. All right. So Baba goes on to say that some psychologists, he says, have referred to psychological or cultural misorientation as a basic African-American mental disorder, meaning that it is the primary condition of psychopathology from which all other forms arise. They argue then that psychological cultural misorientation lies at the root or core of all conditions of African psychopathology. That's very important, family. A lot of us, we suffer from a lot of, mental disorders. And then you say, well, where did it come from? Is it something that I'm eating? Is it my diet? Is it in my genes? It's really the culture. It's really the culture that we're practicing, the culture that we are subjected to, that brings about or precipitates these mental disorders. And he goes on to name some of the disorders. He says, like drugs, crime, and all forms of physical violence and self-destruction. He says our obsession with curling and straightening our hair and our uncompromising total miscommitment to the racial integration, cultural assimilation approach to not only human rights strategy, but in our own personal, individual, social expressions as well. He says our uncompromising commitment to Eurocentric defined and controlled ideas, definitions of reality, knowledge, history, cultural values, ritual, and customs in all aspects of our lives, both practical and intellectual aspects. This includes, for example, our acceptance as non-contradictory, he says, of European or other non-African names and self-definition rituals and customs, their child rearing, marriage, and family practices, their educational, religious, economic, political governance, aesthetic, recreational, and entertainment practices, and even their systems of deviance, even their systems of deviance and pathology. You know, he's saying that this, you know, these are signs or manifestations, you know, of, you know, African mental disorders.
That's right.
All right. And he goes on to talk about our two brilliant African psychologists, Dr. Naeem Akbar and Daudi Azibo, who wrote in the 80s. They published a number of works in the 80s where they came up with a, I'm looking for a classification system of African-centered mental disorders. And he goes on to state or describe, I think 2 or 3, let me see, 3 disorders.
Like 3 of them, 3 or 4.
3 disorders that were described by or identified by Dr. Naeem Akbar. Sis, could you read those 3 disorders, please?
Yes, Queen. The first one is the alien self-disorder family, and that is Africans who have, at the conscious level, become alienated from their natural African orientation, their Ma'ati and ethnic spirituality, through their internalization of the European worldview. They have a blatant rejection of their natural African disposition, and they deny the realities of race, racism, and European supremacy oppression, and strive to emulate those behaviors reinforcing of the European worldview, which sounds like coon to me. The anti-self-disorder family is similar. It manifests similar characteristics like the alien, but it also contains the added ingredient of hostility, covert and overt, toward Africanity and all other things related to it. So these are people that we call self-hate individuals who just hate their blackness and hate themselves and hate everyone who looks like them. These people suffer from the anti-self disorders family. They have internalized the European worldview to the point where they project negativity and hostility toward their own. The next one is the self-destructive disorder. And this represents the faulty and destructive attempts to cope with the unnatural condition of white European supremacy domination. It reflects the condition of being overwhelmed by white supremacy. Necessarily anti-African, so they're not necessarily anti-African nor fully alien to Africanity. They more so represent direct victimized states, reflecting the vicious condition of survival at any cost, mentality obscurely defined, and personality. They represent the deteriorated condition of so-called jungle parasitic and dog-eat-dog type of orientation. Such persons like this family, they have, like other disorders, obviously lost touch with their basic African self-consciousness. Dr. Azibo, he goes on to talk about the analysis of the full-fledged African-centered nosology system. And he proposes that a number of additional classifications that are distinct to Africans, such as materialistic depression, oppression, burnout disorders, theological misorientation, and menticide, to mention a few. And Azibo also proposes that psychological culture misorientation represents basic African mental disorder, and as such serves as the foundation, initial condition of African psychopathology from which all others derive. So psychological culture misorientation family can range from a minimum degree of affliction to a moderate, even severe degree of affliction. While the theory holds that virtually all Africans in America and throughout the diaspora have been afflicted with this basic disorder, it has affected us individually in varying ways. And some of us, he says, to the point of complete menticide. So I think we all know people who struggle with, who could be identified by some of these disorders, you know, and even some of us may have been identified with some of these disorders at one point in life.
Oh yeah, absolutely, sis. And I just want to show the family this. You can go back and pause the video and check this out when you get a chance. In this book, The African Personality in America, Dr. Kobi Kambon did not list Dr. Azibo's nosology on Black personality disorders, but in his next book, Cultural Misorientation, and I've read this thoroughly, On page 101, he provides us with a chart of Azibo's nosology on Black personality disorders. And here it is. I mean, you guys can check it out at your leisure. I'm going to go like this, so maybe you can get a snapshot of it. It talks about psychological cultural misorientation, menticide, peripheral personality disorders on the first page. Here's a snapshot of the second page. And he lists materialistic depression, alien self-orders, anti-self disorders, personal identity conflict, individualism, sexual misorientation, anxiety, reactionary disorders, psychological brainwashing, psychological burnout, oppression, violence, reaction, self-destructive disorders, organic disorders, theological misorientation. Theological misorientation. And he says Jonestown syndrome and theological alienation. So he gets into that family in this book, Cultural Misorientation. Hopefully, Sister Alima, now one day we make it to it. It's a good read, sis. Definitely a good read. So moving on, he provides us with some illustrations of fundamental psychological cultural misorientation among Africans in America. So he talks about the fact that, some of us go and get facelifts. He says that is a sign of a culturally misorientated African. He said when you elect to date European or choose European spouses or as spouses and dates and, and produce mulatto offspring, he's saying that these are signs of an African that suffers from cultural misorientation. And also the way we groom our hair. And sis, like, he went in on Jerry curl. He spent some time.
Yeah, he was mad about that hair now.
He was upset about Jerry curls and all kinds of stuff. And he said the fact that we will sit and like burn our hair, sis, with, burn our scalp. And I remember, sis, as a little girl, having to sit there and my mother, telling me, sit there. I had to take it, sis. I would be in there and my hair is burning, because I may have scratched my scalp the night before and I wasn't supposed to. And then it would burn. And I remember those days, but I stopped getting perms when I was about 15 years old. But it brought back some memories. So he went into that, how we perm our hairs, the Jerry curl, dating non-Africans. What else? Changing our nose, our lips, our facial features.
We talk about how we tend to view people who don't necessarily have strong African facial features as like more attractive.
Yes, I looked at that. The male-female relationships. You're at the bottom of page 144. But he's right, sis. I mean, he is 100% correct. He goes on to talk about that. Yep, he said
I think that, not to cut your wisdom queen, I think the good thing though that Baba would probably be proud of, he's still alive, right? Yeah.
Yes.
The thing that he's probably proud of, I know he's seeing the shift, the change, with the hair, especially with the hair, because I was actually just talking about that with a sister at the library today. And my son had, he's got a box and then he had his pick sticking out. And she was like, man, that's like the 70s.
He is so handsome.
Thank you, queen. And she was loving it. She's like, I just love how the younger generation, how they are embracing, their natural selves. And how now little girls who are 6 years old, and sometimes it makes me emotional because I see them and they have their afro, or, what I'm saying? They just got their regular ponies or whatever, or just some bantus or something, but they just look like Africans. Like they don't have perms like all the little girls had when I was growing up. You know what I'm saying? Like they just look like themselves and they look like they're embracing themselves. And that's a beautiful thing. We may not realize it, but it's a small start, but it's a big start.
Absolutely. Absolutely, sis. And I'm with you. It's so beautiful seeing the little girls with the puffs out, wearing the bushes out, sis. I love it. I absolutely love it. And so I agree with you that there's definitely there's definitely a shift. You definitely see a shift. You see more sisters wearing their hair natural or even wearing braids. I love when we throw the braids in, sis. So you definitely see it. You definitely see it more and more. And I love it. But look, sis, he goes on to talk about religious expression. Oh my gosh. I was inboxing you earlier today on Facebook and I was like, sis, he went in when he talked about theological misorientation. And I know, this this may step on some folks' shoes, or it may hurt some feelings, but it's the truth. I mean, he talks about the Abrahamic faiths, and he's like, right, look, these aren't African spiritual systems.
And like Baba says, sis, a religion or a spiritual system is created by a people for their protection, for their culture, for the manifestation of their benefits. So if I'm white and I create a culture or a religion for my people, why would you as a Black person think that I thought of you and that I had you in mind when I created it? And why would you think that this is going to somehow benefit you when it wasn't created for you?
That's right.
But you can't convince the average person that because their grandma was a Christian and, well, grandma won $500,000 in the lotto and she prayed to God and you know what I'm saying? And they did this and they did that. So people think that it's the blessings that are keeping people attached to these religions. But what they don't realize, and what I often ask is, so what do you say about an atheist who gets the same blessings as you? Because you say that you're so-called blessed because you follow this religion, but there's people who don't follow anything who are way more blessed than you are. So how do you explain that? Is it some imaginal force that's really blessing you, or is it your hard work that's blessing you? You know what I'm saying? So it's like we can't get past that. We can't. We would not. You can't convince nobody of that, sis. They don't want to hear that shit.
Not at all, sis. Not at all. And you're 100% correct. Like he says that it was created in response to the needs and the character of culture. And John Henry Clarke even said that religion, he said, is the deification of one culture, of one's culture. So when we're practicing Christianity, which is clearly Greco-Roman culture, right? We're edifying or uplifting their culture. That is not our culture. Right, because we're not Greco-Roman people, and I asked myself this, sis. I was actually out at dinner with a good friend of mine last Sunday, and we were reading Deuteronomy and Acts, and in both of those chapters, it talks about a prophet. They were getting a prophecy that God is going to send someone from among them, or rise up a prophet, so shall rise up among them. And so then I asked people, well, how is it that Christ, or, how is it that he is the savior of us and he wasn't raised up, sis, among us, right? Christ went over to Africa and taught. Correct me if I'm wrong. So how is this the savior of us? How is he the savior of the world? How is he the savior of African people if he wasn't raised up from among African people and taught African people? So, I don't understand that. But again, sis, he goes on to say that religious systems then are cultural defined phenomenon. He say they are not universal, standing outside of and transcending cultural reality, right? So it is your culture that defines your religion. It is your culture. All right. And he even talked about Islam. He said Christianity and Christ. He said Jesus, Jehovah, Islam, and Allah, Judaism, and Yahweh, and etc. He says that all of these are non-indigenous African words and non-African languages not related to an indigenous African ethnic cultural groups language form. And these deities are also non-African forms, right? And he says that our ancestors, the very first humans on the planet, developed an understanding of the creator, systems of communicating with the creator, and thus names for the creator based on our uniquely special, intimate, and long historical experience with the creator. He says, thus our traditional African names for the creator is aspects in our traditional systems of communications with the creative forces of the universe endured, obviously based their accuracy and effectiveness for thousands and thousands of years, long before we had evidence of the existence of a European, Aryan, or Semitic races like the Persian, Arabs, and Asian in civilized societies. All right. So moving on, sis, what was the next one?
Let's see, after religion, then that's when Baba gets into See, that's still religion.
Let's see.
He talked about religion for a while. Then he gets into some major areas of African American societal activity, which manifests cultural misorientation.
Okay, so you're on 151. Sis, you mind if I brush on 150 really fast and discuss some of the things? Because I had this paragraph highlighted where he says our ancestors courageously fought back against.
Yeah, that's right. And we sat there and let their memory go to shit.
Right. Yeah, we really did. So he went into after he talked about religious systems, he went into the fact that, you know, we have no problem perpetuating non-African names. We have no problem carrying the name of our former slave masters. And he's like, you know, we don't see anything wrong with that. Like, that's become normal and natural for someone to have their slave master's name and to name your children non-African names. So on page 150, he says, our ancestors courageously fought back against these barbaric destroyers of African life, and we, their descendants, have and continue to shamefully dishonor them, our African cultural sovereignty, by forming these intimate associations with the religious belief systems and cultural structures of the enemies of our ancestors, the enemies of African people, hence our own enemies. All right. So then he ends this particular section with, he says, in short, then the imposition of the European worldview on African reality in America in particular has been most pervasive throughout all areas of so-called African American life. Through its powerful institutional tentacles, it pervades and dominates African educational life in America, African religious life in America, African economic life in America, African aesthetic expressions in America, African politics in America, African family, community, and social life in America, and obviously African psychological life and physical survival in general in America. So he goes on to talk about that. And then he lists, like, again, as Sister Lima said, some major areas of African American societal activity, which manifests cultural misorientation. So he's saying, how do you become a culturally misoriented African? Look at what he named first, sis.
Education.
African American education.
Yep, depending on Europeans for their education and accepting Eurocentrism as a philosophical core of every educational discipline. That's exactly facts.
Second one, African American religion. Read that, my sister.
Accept and practice white supremacy Eurocentrism as the core of their religious beliefs and activities, be they Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or some other non-African form. Therefore, non-African culture values, icons, labels, language, etc., predominate in the religious beliefs, symbols, practices, and rituals of Africans in America.
African American economics. Africans in America accept and practice white supremacy Eurocentrism throughout their economic business activities. Who do you spend your money with, right? It says, thus the consumer dependency orientation, as opposed to the producer owner orientation, and the dominant practice of spending money outside of our own community group dominate African economic practices in America. That's true. We have a dominant, he says, the dominant practice of spending money outside of our own community. All right. African American media. Africans in America accept white supremacy, Eurocentric anti-African reality imagery projected through the media by depending upon it for African affirmation, by overwhelmingly patronizing European media and by perpetuating it in our own media as well. And that's why I keep telling you folks to support the Meltrek Project, support Aaron Knows About Africa, support Naomi Bradley, Benjamin Njah, people like Akua Agassi, support the Black media. African American cultural icon images and symbolism. It says Africans in America accept and utilize white supremacy, Eurocentric, anti-African images and symbols as their very own. Therefore, Eurocentric images and symbols are pervasive throughout the African community in America, i.e., on our person, in our homes, churches, schools, businesses, our recreation and entertainment, and in our thoughts and ideas. Their names and physical characteristics also dominate our personal self-imagery and self-definition. That's a fact. All right. 6, African American political activity. Africans in America accept and utilize white supremacy, Eurocentric, anti-Africanness, and all conventional methods, strategies, and actions geared towards social group racial empowerment. The political priorities and objectives, goals of Africans in America are therefore Eurocentric in nature rather than Afrocentric. If they were Afrocentric, sis, we'd be fighting for reparations, right? We'd be going to Washington saying, where's my check, right? We will be prioritizing, right, achieving social racial, it says, so we will be wanting our check instead of, he said, Eurocentric in nature rather than Afrocentric, i.e. prioritizing achieving racial integrations with Europeans and access to European institutions, resources, etc., over developing African independence, institutions, and self-determination, sis. So right now, the political agenda is, you know, we want equality, we want access, we want to integrate, we want to be inclusive, right, in everything that they do. And that is a Eurocentric political agenda. That is not an Afrocentric political agenda. Can you go ahead and read the rest, sis?
Number 7, African American social activity. We accept and utilize white supremacy, Eurocentric values, images, definitions, which are anti-Africanist and relating to each other, and by requiring European acknowledgement, recognition, involvement, participation, approval, and legitimacy in all areas of life, and by ascribing deity-like status to those who are successful in attaining it, which is facts. We do accept all of their values, images, their definitions, and we strive to be that. We view what they deem to be appropriate as a sign, or what they deem to be success. This is what we also attain for. So yeah, we basically monkey see, monkey do. We do everything they do.
Absolutely, and they are our standard.
That's the standard.
Yeah, they are our standard. We haven't created our own standard. They have created our standard. And so we've allowed them to create the standard. And then we sit here and bust our asses, sis, to try to reach the standard or conform to the standard.
Right.
I'm talking about, you know, and this is like, you know, I'm thinking about the standard for success, right? The standard of what it means to have a family, you know, the standard of beauty. That's right. Allow them to create the standard in almost every aspect of our lives. And we work and we bust our butts and we go crazy. As Sister Alima said, we go out of our African minds to try to achieve their standard. All right. So moving on. Lastly, he displays a chart on page 155. I'm going to show it to you guys. He gives us a distribution of psychological or cultural misorientation among Africans in America. Let me show you guys this chart really fast. And this is it, family.
That's it.
Let me. So he ends the chapter with showing a distribution of psychological cultural misorientation. Okay. And since I you know, the engineer in me, as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, this is a bell curve. This is a normal distribution. And so, guys, if you Google normal distribution or bell curve or Gaussian distribution, I actually use this curve a lot in my dissertation. It's just a curve that shows you the mean and the standard deviation or variance of a particular statistic. So here, I guess the statistic is cultural misorientation. And usually in a bell curve, it gives you the average in the middle of the curve. So the peak of the curve represents the average of the curve. And so here he's saying, I guess it's that the average would be moderate, what, 70 to 80%, and more than 50% of us moderate, 78. I think that's what he's saying. I don't really know.
He explains on 154 that the vast majority, 70 to 80% of the African population,
yep. So this is
hypothesized to be afflicted at the moderate level or range of this disorder.
Yep. And that's without me even remembering that. Without reading that says, yep. So that typically with a bell curve, yep, in the middle at the peak, that's the mean. And then, of course, as it spreads out, you get the standard, what we call the standard deviation or the variation. All right. So he's saying that most of us suffer from a moderate degree of cultural misorientation. And then, as you can see, it kind of skews out. Some of us are severe, and very few of us have minimal cultural misorientation. All right, sis. So is there anything left? that you would like to discuss, my sister? Sister Lima? Oh, your mic's on mute, sis.
I'm sitting here talking, but no, family basically wraps it up in the conclusion and basically says that, you know, whether it's our religious practices that we're doing, our hair, our who we choose to date or whatever, it needs to be in line with African culture in order for us to be in line with our African self-consciousness and our African self-extension. So he said the African mental health, it depends on our closeness to or the continuity that we Africans maintain to our cultural origin.
That's a fact. That's a fact, my sister. So we have 2 chapters left. We knocked this book down pretty fast, sis.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, we knocked this book down pretty fast. And I remember you said that after we finished up the Blueprint for Black Power, you wanted to choose some books that we could really, you know, some books that weren't too lengthy,
right?
That we could kind of knock down. And so, family, right now we're working on getting in the 3rd book for the RAM Book Club, and so we will announce that I guess on the day that we discuss chapter 8. Next week we'll discuss chapter 7, and the following week we'll discuss chapter 8, and at that time we will announce the next book, and we'll give everybody about a week or 2, sis, maybe 2 weeks to grab the book and read the first chapter, and we
may have to. I know I'll be here next week, but the week after that I'll be in Africa, so I don't know how good my service will be. You know, so we'll see. We'll see how good the service is, if I'll be able to join. You know, if we'll be able to have it not next week, but the week after next, because I'm not gonna be in the country.
Okay, sis, how long are you guys gonna be gone? I'm so excited for you.
For 2 weeks. I'm ready to get the hell out of here.
2 weeks, 7 countries, right? 7.
I wish it was 7. No, it's 4.
4 countries. Okay, so 4 countries. Sis, enjoy. I know you will.
Oh yes, most definitely. I am ready. You know me.
I know. Oh my gosh, you guys are gonna
over there and everything. I am ready. Never mind, but I'm ready, y'all.
I know you put the countdown on Facebook. You said I'm counting down.
10 days.
How many days now, sis?
10.
10 days, and you guys are gone.
And I'm so excited because my babies are coming this time. Because the last time we had the trips, they were in school. So you know, I couldn't like take them out of school for like 2 weeks or whatever without them bitching about it. But now that they're homeschooled, now I can take them on more trips now. So
absolutely, sis. And I'm excited for you. I can't wait until you come back. You know, I want to see the pics and all that you guys learned. I can't wait till you and Ben like co-author a book on like your travels. I think that would be
hot. We definitely to do something like that. We got some stuff we're gonna do together. We just have so many individual projects right now.
Right.
We gotta get them shits out the way first. But I actually had another idea of a book that we can do together. I'm not gonna mention it because I don't want somebody to steal it.
Right.
Definitely said that was a good idea, but that's gonna take us some time.
Oh yeah, just write down as much notes, sis, and capture, and then you guys put that in a book and put it out there, sis. I think that would be powerful. I think that would be extremely powerful.
All right,
family. So we're getting ready to get out of here. So we love you all. Have a safe and productive week. Share the video, like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the blog, Lily.poetry.
Subscribe to the blog, family. Come check us out. Come support your sister, family. It's free. All you got to do is put your email in there. Make sure you confirm. If you subscribe, family, you got to confirm.
Absolutely. And she's not one of the folks, I'm telling you, because I'm subscribed. So I don't want you guys to think that when you subscribe, she's one of these people that hit you with a bunch of emails.
Yeah, I done had to unsubscribe from a few of them, sis.
Yeah, no.
I wanted to support their blogs because they support mine, but goddamn, like you have a post every hour. Like I got shit to do. Don't bug me every hour.
Absolutely. So no, family, you don't have to worry about being bombarded with a bunch of notifications throughout the day.
About 2
notification, a week, every other week.
I ain't got time to be blogging all day. I got shit to do.
Yeah, so you don't have to worry about that. So subscribe to her blog, Lily La Poete Speaks. Subscribe to this channel, Dr. Oyama. Please hit the bell to receive notifications. I don't even go live, but maybe once or twice a week. Okay. So, you know, you don't have to worry about being bombarded with notifications from this channel. So we love you. Have a safe and productive week. Share the video. Peace and power.
Odavo.
Adabo.